Hi, I'm Andrea with the Bangs, and in this interview, I have the privilege of speaking with Yasmine Mohammed. She has written a book called Unveiled. I wish I had an actual copy. I read it on Kindle, but here it is. It's called Unveiled. Seriously, guys, go read it. It's an amazing story. I don't think I need to really explain much more about this interview because we talk about her book. We talk about her work, why she wrote the book in the first place, and what her passion is for helping Muslim women and women who are forced to wear hijab. So I'm going to let you guys get on to the interview. If you haven't subscribed, don't forget to do that. And without further ado, here is Yasmine. Okay, where shall we start? Let's start at the beginning of your book, how you kind of frame it. I thought that was very interesting. You frame it with the Sam Harris, Ben Affleck incident, and then you kind of end with that. So can we kind of start there and then
absolutely.
see where it goes?
Let's do that. Mm-hmm.
So why did you decide to start your book with that?
Because that was the point that made me feel like I wanted to join into this space of speaking out, going public, activism, whatever. Mm-hmm. So for 15 years, I had been just living my life quietly, going through my own stuff, dealing with my own, traumas and issues and overcoming, finding my new belief system and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was all very personal and private. And then when this happened, that was sort of like the big catalyst that made me feel like, okay, I want to speak up. I want to be involved in this conversation. And it was mostly because I felt that I completely agreed with everything that Bill Maher and Sam Harris were saying. Mm-hmm. But I felt that they were being attacked because of the fact that they were white American men. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, I am a brown Arab woman, and I'm going to say the exact same thing that these men are saying. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that I have a different identity means that people might be forced to actually engage with the message as opposed to being stuck on the identity of the messenger.
Right.
So that was really the initial motivation for me speaking up.
You actually say, there's a quote where you do talk about ideas, not identities. Mm-hmm. Yet it is your identity that sort of allows you to spread these ideas.
Yeah, because of the political climate that we're in. It's exactly for that reason. So I think that what Sam and Bill were saying that day was based on Pew Research. Mm-hmm. I mean, it shouldn't matter if it's coming from the mouth of a white American male or if it's coming from the mouth of a brown Arab female. It's completely irrelevant. These are facts. This is data. Mm-hmm. So what you're identifying there is a problem. Mm-hmm. And that's the same problem that I identified, which is that people are unwilling to engage with the actual facts because they're stuck on the identity of the person. So I'm just going to step in this space mm-hmm. with a completely different identity mm-hmm. and then try to get that message through. So it's like, in a way, trying to circumvent this identity politics virus that is stopping people from having the conversations that we need to be having.
Right. So can we go through, I think that the best example, because I wanted to talk about the sort of why you can't criticize Islam, but mm-hmm. I feel like that's kind of what your story is showing why we need to. So yep. Rather than explaining, here's why we should be allowed to criticize Islam and giving sort of all these examples from, thought life and looking at examples of from an academic perspective, you're just like, here's my story. This is why. And which is, of course, stories. I've been looking at stories a lot lately, and they're so powerful. Just story in general. So your story speaks, I guess, volumes beyond the sort of, we can look at this, this, and this. So can you give a sort of, I don't want to say quick, but a summary of certain points of your story so we can sort of connect that over to the idea of like why Islam needs to be criticized or critiqued?
So it's just adding the human element to it, because a lot of people feel like they shouldn't critique Islam because that way they're going to be hurting Muslims. And so what I want them to recognize is through not critiquing Islam, you are actually hurting Muslims. And so I'm letting them see that, you know, this happens all the time on Twitter, which is probably the most toxic place for these conversations, but it's where it's happening. But, you know, these kinds of things happen all the time. So, for example, if you talk about, you know, if you say, okay, these rape gangs happened in the UK and they were by, you know, predominantly Pakistani Muslim men were taking these girls into these rape gangs, and some girls were as young as 11. People will respond with, yeah, but all men rape. Yeah, but like white men rape too, or white men rape more, which of course they do, because the population of Britain is more white men. So statistically,
yeah.
You know, it's like, sure, but in China, Chinese men rape more.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
That's
not really a point. But what ends up happening there is when you stop the conversation from happening, and these rape gangs are a good example of that. I mean, a horrific example of that, because people like politicians and journalists were losing their jobs over wanting to speak out about these rape gangs. And they were being silenced because people were saying, if you talk about this, then you are an Islamophobic, racist, bigot, whatever. So through silencing these people, through using those buzzwords, what they were essentially doing was protecting the rapists and allowing them to continue to rape these girls. So they were empowering rapists. They're trying to protect this Muslim minority group or protect these Pakistani men. But through protecting them, you are empowering them to continue to rape these girls. So that is the element that I need people to understand, is there is a minority within that minority. When people talk about female genital mutilation and then people jump up and they're like, hey, it's their culture. Hey, it's their religion. They should be allowed to do whatever they want. The person that just spoke those words is essentially standing in the way of somebody who is trying to stop a woman from taking a razor to the genitals of a little girl. So it is essentially, if you can visualize a woman about to take a razor, about to chop off a little girl's clitoris, comes by and tries to stop that woman. And then this little virtue signaling person comes along and says, hey, let them off the clitoris because it's their culture and it's their religion and it's their business. So you're leaving this girl to be mutilated. So that's the second layer that they're always not noticing. And I'm going to give you a third example, because this is the one that is the closest to my heart, which is about hijab and how you see hijab splashed on every flat surface. It's all over advertisements. It's all over everything. Cover of Sports Illustrated, being sold in Banana Republic, being sold in Marks and Spencer, Nike putting their swoosh on it, Barbie putting it on their fucking doll, like just everywhere. Meanwhile, there are Muslim women around the globe that are being beaten, that are being abused, that are being imprisoned, and that are being killed. Muslim women, not just in the Muslim world, but all around the globe. And they're fighting against this tool of misogyny. And then over here, we're taking that tool and we're putting it on the runway, and we're putting it on commercials, and we're putting it on the cover of magazines. So that's the miscommunication here. And I really truly believe that if people just viewed issues and circumstances and judged them based on morality and based on an objective truth versus looking at the skin color or the ethnicity or the religion of the person, then this would not happen. You know, if a blonde woman cut out the clitoris of her blonde daughter, nobody would have any problem with that woman going to prison. But if a Black woman from Somalia does it to her little Somali daughter, all of a sudden it's a separate issue. It is not a separate issue. It's exactly the same thing. And that's really where the conflict lies. I think that's where the miscommunication lies, is we have been taught to not express any kind of
judgment
criticism
over
judgment.
Other cultures, because it's called a culture. And you've actually pointed this out. It's not, Islam is not a culture. It's a religion that covers many cultures.
That is so true. But even if it is a culture, who cares?
Okay.
Some cultures iron their daughters' breasts, to flatten them out. So are we not going to criticize that because it's a culture? I mean, what else did we do? They put virgins in volcanoes. That was their culture.
Or binding feet in China.
Binding feet in China. Exactly. Like cultural or religious, right is right and wrong is wrong. And whether it's cultural, whether it's religious, where it's happening on the globe is completely irrelevant.
And you point out, okay, so you were forced to wear a hijab at 9, is it?
Yeah.
From 9 on. And so can you explain from, like, I guess your first person experience, you're a child and you're like, okay, I guess I have to do this now. Like, what was that like when you first had to put it on?
Well, it's very coercive. It's, you're told good, clean girls wear this. Good girls will go to heaven if they wear this. Bad, filthy girls don't wear this. You will, as soon as you put it on, everybody in your family and in your community is like, oh my goodness, look at the light from your face. Oh, so wonderful. And so there's just you're being coerced through earthly things, like through your family and stuff like that, but also supernatural things. You're also being told that you're going to go to heaven versus burning in hell for eternity, being strung up by your hair as your brain boils for eternity for showing your hair to men. So, when you're 9 years old, these are pretty convincing things. It doesn't take a lot. And then plus when you're a kid too, you want to please your parents. You want to make them happy. You want them to be proud of you. So even though I hated it, I still did it. And of course, it really wasn't until my own daughter got to the same age that that pang of like, oh man, I really missed out on my childhood happened. Like I didn't notice it. But, when my daughter is 9 years old, she's running around on the monkey bars and she's going to soccer practice and she's going to dance class and she's, riding a horse and riding a bike and swimming and all of these things that were totally forbidden for me because I have to cover myself up now, everything but my hands and face. And I have to walk like a lady and sit like a lady and lower my voice and lower my eyes. Don't laugh too loud. And it was just like, literal shackles, literal chains is what that hijab is to me. It's just the physical representation of just that dehumanization or that gender apartheid that women in these communities have to deal with. Like, that's just the part that you see.
Right. And that actually is an interesting theme that I saw you explain in the beginning and I guess throughout and then at the end about these two communities of women, one being the your family, and then explaining how women are in Islam in general, and then the feminist community in the West. First, I'd like to focus on the space where you saw other women from your perspective. You explained, you did a very good job of explaining this, but if you could explain now what is, like, there's not really a sisterhood of Muslim women. It's almost like competition is what I got from you. Can you go into that a bit more?
Well, that's something that I recognized just recently. I didn't realize it again when I was in it, but once you're out of something, you can look back and see it objectively. And I hadn't realized how incredibly vicious it is, because I just grew up in that and I was used to that.
Right.
But I really believe a lot of it has to do with, especially living in the Middle East, I could really see that a lot of it has to do with that idea of a man being allowed to have 4 wives. And so women are just in constant competition with each other. First of all, like even with hijab at 9 years old, you're being told no man is ever going to want to marry you unless you cover your hair, right? Because you're just going to be dirty. Yeah. You're 9. But this is what your whole life, like, you're groomed to be like, to be married and to make babies, right? So that's your only purpose. So you have to try and find like the most desirable man possible. And he wants to try and find the most desirable woman possible. And he's not going to go marrying some woman that's not wearing hijab because, she's obviously a filthy whore.
Right.
So if you want to be a good person that is desired, that somebody would want to marry you, then you need to cover up. So what ends up happening anyway is just that constant competition between women. And it was actually Jay Shapiro, who you had on your show too. It was a conversation that him and I had where he kind of identified to me, he's like, women really don't support each other unless they are in free liberal democracies and they already feel empowered. And then they have that space to empower other women. But as long as they are feeling disempowered and as long as they are feeling like they're at the bottom of the totem pole, it's really just about survival. It's dog eat dog.
Right.
And in the Muslim world, women are very dog eat dog. Like it's really, really bad. And so with the community that is online now, that started with Masih Alijinajad, I just pronounced her name wrong, but she is the woman who started My Stealthy Freedom and White Wednesdays and all of these campaigns for Iranian women to start removing their hijab.
Right.
She started creating this sisterhood, and then I just jumped in on that and expanded it beyond just Iran, because there's women in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt and in Sudan and in Jordan and in Canada and in the US and France, UK and everywhere. And so we sort of created that space where all of these women who want to empower themselves and empower each other can do that.
Have the freedom to, yeah.
And it has been incredibly heartwarming and uplifting to see that community grow.
Oh, and that's the wonders of the internet for... It does do some good,
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. And if it didn't, I wouldn't be there. Right. But it's a double-edged sword. But these women are in societies where they cannot speak their mind freely, even to their own family members sometimes. So to be able to go online with an anonymous account and burn your niqab on a video and attach it to a hashtag. It was the Arabic hashtag in Saudi Arabia that just said, burn your niqab.
Yeah.
To be able to do that is beyond like healing, because you just feel so restricted in your whole life. And to just be able to do an act of defiance like that, just, it helps your sanity. To know also that there are other women around the world that are supporting you, men and women around the world that are supporting you and cheering you on, that really helps to encourage you to just grab your freedom, just do what you need to do to live your life to the fullest, to live it honestly. And, you know, there's so many people in those countries that have to live a double life. I cannot tell you how many messages I get where people say, I hate putting this shit on my head every day and having to go to school or having to go to work and having to pray because, you know, you're in this family or you're in this community where you have to do so many things that are completely fake and that you don't believe in, but you have to do it for survival. It is so incredibly traumatizing and it really just kills you. There's no way to describe it to somebody. Like if you could just imagine that you're forced to live a life that is so different from how you want to live it, because otherwise you'll be executed or you'll be excommunicated. You know, it's really, really difficult, which is why I started the organization Free Hearts, Free Minds, was just to help people that are in those situations to give them the tools to be able to cope until they can get out of that situation.
Well, I mean, I know for you explained it in a like cracks in the cement.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Can you explain some of the things that added those cracks?
So for me, it was really just the fact that I was born and raised in Canada. So I'm always seeing whatever it is. I'm seeing the facts of life on TV. I'm seeing the Cosby Show. I'm seeing Family Ties. I'm seeing a world that is not the world that I'm living in. And I am seeing Gloria Steinem, and I am seeing Madonna, and I am seeing, you know, Sheryl Sandberg, and I'm seeing these women that are living a life and speaking in a way that I want to be a part of that. You know, I want that freedom too. I want that, you know, I also want to be a feminist. I also recognize the things that they are saying, but I couldn't be a part of that world because it just wasn't the world that I happened to be born into, right? Because even though I was born and raised in Canada, I was living in this bubble. But every time I saw those things, they were cracks in the cement that was trying to entomb me.
Right.
And right now what's happening in all over the Muslim world is the internet is causing all those cracks.
Right.
YouTube videos, Twitter, that's the cracks for them. So whereas a woman would normally, you know, I talk about it, you're just like with everything, your choices are fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
And most women freeze. Right? You're just like, I will accept this life because otherwise I'll burn in hell. I will accept who they tell me to marry. I hate it and I'm unhappy, but I will bury my unhappiness. I will swallow my unhappiness. And I did that. You know, I did that when I married the guy that my family forced me to marry. I did the freezing. And it wasn't until I had my daughter that I felt like I wanted to fight or to flee, basically. Actually, first it was to flee, was to get out and to get my daughter out. And then it was the Ben Affleck episode that encouraged me to fight. But that's a very, you know, for me to be able to flee when I'm living in a secular democracy like Canada is very, very different, right? Like I could get student loans, I could start my life over again, but you're living, all these women that I'm interacting with now are living in countries where if they try to flee, there's no support. In fact, they could get themselves killed. So there's a lot bigger incentive for them to stay frozen.
Right.
And then those that fight end up in prison or end up killed.
Yeah.
So very little incentive for them to fight as well.
Right.
And people look at the Muslim world and they see all these women covered head to toe in black, quietly walking along behind their husbands. And then they come to this conclusion like, oh, I guess they must be happy because they're not complaining. No, they literally cannot complain.
There's not a choice.
It is not a choice. They do not have the ability. Now, having said that, of course, there are women that are so indoctrinated, like the women that you see in the ISIS camps, for example. They're starving. Their children are starving. There's all sorts of disease. And they're so about ISIS lives and we will kill the infidels and we will behead you and all that stuff. Like, yeah, sure. Of course, there will still be people that are so indoctrinated that they will say, yes, I'm happy to live this life. I'm happy to be subservient to a male.
Sorry, I'm thinking of your sister. The fact that she...
Well, exactly. My sister is an example of that. Like, yeah, of course, though. But we see that everywhere. Like, you see that even with the fundamentalist Christian communities or Jewish communities, Mormon communities, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists. There's people that can get indoctrinated into all sorts of different belief systems, and then they support their own subjugation is very common. It's not like Muslim women are the only ones to do it.
Right.
It's a form of Stockholm syndrome that is prevalent all over all sorts of different ideologies. But we cannot discount the fact that a lot of these women are living in countries where they do not have the choice or the ability or the resources to fight back. So that's why they just keep their mouth shut and they just swallow it. You just accept it because there is no other option.
Right.
So what's the point in just feeling angry and sad and depressed over the fact that you want freedom and you can't have it? So you start to just forget about it. You block that part out of your head and you just live your life.
Like, is it sort of
and
like
those are the women that I'm reaching.
Right. Is it I'll work with this? Sure. Like, is it kind of like, I'll work with the system. Right.
It's submission. It's literally the word Islam translates to submission. You succumb.
How many men are submitting?
It's a very different situation for men, let me just say.
Okay. Unless
Unless you're a gay man. If you're a gay man, then there's a lot of that going on too. But, let's not even try to compare the way a Muslim man lives and the way a woman lives. It's entirely different. It's like chalk and cheese. So like I said, unless it's a gay man.
I love that comparison that is worlds away.
Worlds away, exactly. Yes. Most of the men that leave Islam, because a lot of them do, are leaving for reasons that are very just intellectual reasons, right? Islam doesn't make sense. There's a lot of inconsistencies. There's a lot of, scientific inaccuracies. There's all sorts of reasons to want to leave the religion. Yeah, there's so much violence. There's so much hate. There's tons of reasons to want to leave. But growing up as a Muslim man versus growing up as a Muslim woman are two very different experiences. I mean, Islam really, there are a hadith and there are verses in the Quran that talk about how men are above women. There's even a hadith that, men are the guardians of women. Right. Women are like their prisoners. And it's so they get given this stature which is above women. Women get told that heaven is going to be filled with women because women are less intelligent than men, and women are less religious than men. They're not as pious as men. You know, it takes, if you have a witness to a crime, one woman's testimony is only worth half of that of a man. You know what I mean? Like you need 2 women to equal 1 man. You know, I could go on and on with so many things in Islam that elevate men above women. So a lot of women that are in those communities you're seeing these things. You're taught to accept that you are less than. You're not happy about it, but you just accept it because that's the way life is. And that's, you know, who are you to argue with the creator of the universe?
Yeah.
And also, who are you to argue with a government that could punish you severely for trying to step out of line?
Right.
And so you kind of just get stuck. Like when I was working in Qatar, I had this one student who her parents made her marry this man. She married this man. He beat her. She went back to her family's house and she said, my husband beat me. And her father was like, so what? Who cares? Don't embarrass me. I'm not going to have a divorced daughter. Go back to your husband. And her mother took pity on her and said, I'll let you live downstairs with the nannies, basically with this, because they have servants in Qatar, all over the Gulf. And she lived down there while her husband remarried and had babies and went on with his life, and sort of kept her prisoner because she can't divorce him. He has to divorce her.
Oh.
And his punishment, he's not going to let her free, right? Why would he do that? And so she literally can't do anything in her life without his permission. She can't travel. She can't work.
Right.
She can't.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the only thing she could do was go to school because he had given her permission to go to college before all of this happened. So she already had permission to go to college.
Okay.
And so she was coming to college just because there was nothing else that she could do in her life. So she's just stuck in this loop. And she's making the best of it, right? She comes to class in the morning. She brings Starbucks for all her friends. She's, you know, she never does her homework or pays attention in class, but it was just something to do. It was just like, and she just, you make the best of it, and you survive, right? That's human nature.
Well, you said on a number of different occasions that you knew something wasn't true.
Yeah.
But then you're like, well, you didn't say this. You're like, I'm a kid, but like you are a kid. So you're like, okay, I literally saw that thing, but my mom says, nope, that didn't happen.
Yep. Yeah.
So I guess I'm wrong, even though my eyes saw it, my ears heard it, but I'm wrong. So I'll go with her on this one.
Absolutely. That happens all the time.
So because your story, you're like, this is my story, but this is actually lots of women's stories.
Absolutely.
Can you, I mean, there's a couple times, but can you give an example and explain? Some people watching will not understand indoctrination and not understand being told you see one thing and then no, you don't. And then you literally believing okay, well, I get so I just want to make it understandable for me and for our audience.
I mean, it's hard to explain indoctrination because it's kind of like, you have to have experienced it. But I think that one thing that a lot of people can relate to is just growing up and being told that there's a Santa Claus or an Easter Bunny or a tooth fairy or whatever it is. So it's very different because there's no punishment for not believing in the tooth fairy.
Right, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, I'll take my husband as an example. He said, when he was 5 or 6 years old, his parents would go through all this elaborate stuff of like making Santa's footprints and
Oh,
making little
wow.
reindeer droppings. Yeah. And he knew that it wasn't true, but he was afraid to say,
Oh,
I don't believe in Santa Claus, because then he thought maybe I won't get gifts. So he just thought he would continue with the
okay.
charade. And also his parents went through so much effort to try and build this charade up for him that he thought he would just like play along.
Right.
It's like that sort of telling yourself to believe something even though it's not true, because there is some motivation for doing that. But like multiply that, 100-fold.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like you kind of get to this point where you're like, yeah, I don't think that I should be revering a 53-year-old man that married a 6-year-old girl.
Yeah.
That just doesn't feel right to me. And then you have the adults telling you, yes, but she was 9 years old when he raped her.
Yes.
So she was
9.
a woman.
Yeah.
And still you're like, that freaks me out. That makes me very uncomfortable.
Yes.
I am angered by this. I am scared because I am a young girl myself being told that I'm supposed to revere this man. And then you get scared. You're like, is that the kind of man that they're going to marry me off to? Am I going to be raped when I'm 9 years old? Like you just, these are the things that you think of, right? Because you relate to her. But then you're told that questioning, like, who do you think you are? To question the actions and to question the motives of the last prophet, of the best example of humanity of all kind, that the creator of the universe has chosen to be the last prophet. You know what I mean? Like this just some little kid. Honestly, like where do you get the arrogance? Who do you think you are to even have those questions?
Well, it's the Emperor's New Clothes, right? Exactly. It's the kid who had the eyes to see. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And
instead of being celebrated for the fact that she's like the Emperor's wearing new clothes, you get demonized for it. And then you get filled with this self-hate.
Right.
Because you're like,
why am I this way?
How do I feel this way about somebody that everybody is supposed to love?
Yeah.
How do I not love Allah? Why am I scared of him? Shouldn't I love him? But you're scared of him, and you're not just scared, you're terrified. Yeah. So you're told that you're supposed to love him, but in actuality, you're terrified of him because it's like this really insidious, abusive relationship.
Right.
Where you have to fear him, but you also have to love him.
Like, you better love me. Well, because it reminds me of you mentioning how your mother would often threaten you with a hadith about the mothers being at the foot of Allah. Is that it? Or of heaven?
Heaven being at the feet of your mother.
So can you go into that a bit?
Yeah. Turns out that was one that was used by a lot of abusive moms.
Well, and then again, can't exploit it. What good is it?
Yeah, they totally. Yeah, why not? So it's a way to control your kids, to make them do what you want them to do, because you're essentially, like, the mom is essentially taking the place of God, where she gets to decide whether you're going to go to heaven or hell.
Right.
So she has that kind of power. And so that was the hadith that was used to force me to marry the man that she forced me to marry.
Right.
It was used throughout my life, but
she really pulled it out for that one, right? Yeah. Now, because I did have some questions about. She was so excited about this one. This is the one, right? Yeah. Did she know who he was? Sorry, for the record, can we explain who he was?
Yeah, so he was an Al Qaeda member. He had left Egypt as a teenager to go live in Afghanistan with bin Laden. He was involved in the U.S. embassy bombings in Tanzania and Kenya, as well as lots of other terrorist activities. So he's currently imprisoned in Egypt. I don't know actually if he's still alive or not, but he was sentenced to 15 years hard labor, last I heard. Did she know who he was? I have no doubt. I have no doubt that she knew who he was. Okay. Yeah.
Because it seemed like, the way you explained her reaction to him sounds like she revered him as like a holy.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
It seemed like she knew from how I read it, yeah. But I just wanted to know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So she regarded him as somebody who walked the walk and didn't just talk the talk.
Right.
So most Muslims are like, yeah, that's right. Behead the infidel. Totally, okay. Man.
Yeah.
Caliphate.
High fives.
But they're not going to actually get their hands dirty, right?
Right. Okay.
Because most people are not murderous, psychopaths.
Yeah.
But they are so indoctrinated that they will repeat these things,
right.
Behead them, kill the Jews, all that stuff. They just say it in every prayer, on every Friday sermon. You just hear it. But to be the person to actually pick up a sword and behead somebody was something that she just thought she was just so impressed that he was willing to walk the walk.
Right. Okay, so the one story that, because I listened to a couple podcasts, like I said, and I read your book after that. There was this one story I don't know if you've talked about, but it really made, I don't know why, because a lot of other bad stuff had happened, but this was the one that I was like, oh my gosh, my heart. It hurt for you for days. Anyway, the chicken soup story.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't want to, you don't have to, but I just, that story.
No, but it's that
beyond
was the moment.
It's such a small thing. I knew that she was making you marry a member of Al Qaeda before.
Yeah.
Yet that story made it click who this woman was and what you were to her and what the truth was.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's sort of back to what you were talking about of like reality in front of you being one thing, but you're being told something else. And so you deny reality and you just go with what you've been told. Mm-hmm. I had been living in that mode, and it wasn't until that chicken soup incident that sort of caused those two things to collide.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, the reality that was in front of me, that cognitive dissonance that I had been living in for so long, it could no longer.
You couldn't deny it.
It couldn't. I couldn't sustain it anymore. Mm-hmm. So, are we going to tell your listeners what that story is, or make them read the book?
Well, I know. I feel like it would be. I think I want you to tell it because the context is so important.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been saving that for people to.
No.
Okay.
No. So essentially what had happened is I was pregnant.
Yes. And
I guess I have to go back a little bit. So my thing with Islam was always around food.
Right.
So as the wife, your duties are to cook, clean, be raped. Yeah. That's what you do.
Yeah.
And the cooking thing was always such a point of intense violence and turmoil because he was so specific about the foods that he wanted. So I give the example in the book of he picked up a Mediterranean cookbook and he had like little Post-it notes and he'd post-it note on the pictures that he wanted, like, make me this.
Yeah.
And then I had to make it. And of course I had to make it look like the picture.
You're not a
Which,
professional chef, but okay. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And even then, like, the photography that's involved and whatever. So anyway, that was I didn't know at the time, but like that was my goal, was to try and make it look like this picture. And if it didn't look like the picture, or if it didn't taste to his liking, he would take the plate, he'd throw it at me, I'd get beaten up. Like that was always that. Meal times were such a panicky time for me.
Right.
And so I was trying to alleviate this panic by encouraging him to try new Canadian foods.
Because those were doable. Yep. Yeah.
Those were so much easier, and they were things that I was more familiar with. And so, because Arabic foods, of course, take like for frickin' all day to make, right? They're so detailed. And Canadian foods were a lot quicker, and I was pregnant. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll like encourage him. Like there's this delicacy in Canada, we call it chicken noodle soup. Like, let me make it for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I was making that for him. Mm-hmm. And you're pregnant, you're super tired. He's about to come in the door. I'm still in my, dirty, ratty pajamas. I have to go change and do my hair and fix my makeup because heaven forbid he see me that way. Because again, that's part of your role as the wife, right?
Right.
And so I'm totally panicking because now I need to finish making dinner, but I also need to go and get cleaned up. And I have never trusted my mom to ask her to help me with any food because it was too precious. Like, it was too important to get it right.
Right.
But at this one time, I thought, you know what? Like, how hard can it be? So I had already made the chicken stock, and the noodles were already cooked in it. All I needed her to do was take the chicken that was cooked, chop up the breast, throw it in the pot.
Right.
And I said, if you're going to throw in anything else, like from the drumstick or whatever, make sure that there are like no, bits of bone or even the bits of cartilage, nothing gray.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, he's so meticulous. So please, please, please be super, super careful.
Right.
And she was like, yeah, no problem. I got this. I'm not stupid. I know how to put, chicken in the soup or whatever. I'm like, yes, but just please.
No, but you were almost not going to let her do it at one point.
I know.
You were like, no, I'll just do it. I'll just do it. No. And then she convinced you.
Yeah. She's like, I got this. Just go get cleaned up before your husband sees you like that. And then I went and I got cleaned up, and then I came back, and then I went to, we're sitting down for dinner. I didn't check. So we're sitting down for dinner, and then I go to ladle up some soup, and the ladle comes up, and it's literally like bones and cartilage and skin. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
That I didn't even, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'm going to just dip this back in and try again. Like that's just not, and then I try again and it comes back up the same way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how is this possible? It's literally like she took the strainer full of all of like the chicken carcass and just like dumped it in the pot. And then I pick it up again, and then he comes now, right? He's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? What's taking you so long? Don't you even know how to put something in a fucking bowl? Blah, blah, blah. And he comes and he stands next to me. And I was like, I was really stressed out and tired, and I asked Mom to help me, and she's sitting at the table. She can't see the pot or anything.
Yeah.
And then she goes, oh, you're going to blame this on me?
What's this? Like, what is she?
And that's when I was like, blame this on me. Like, you know what's in this pot. Like, this wasn't an accident. Like,
Right.
you know that this happened. Like, I just like trying to make sense of it because it just was, I couldn't believe that that's what had actually happened.
Yeah.
But when she said that, and then, you know, I saw him kind of had this moment where he went, like, he saw
And
what
then he
was in the
looked
pot.
and looked at her and you.
He looked at her and then he looks at me and then he's like, I'm expecting like a blow to the head.
Yeah.
Right. And he goes, that's okay. We don't need any soup. Like, let's just, you know, what else is for dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was just like, you know, it's just that moment where you cannot deny anymore that all these years of me, 'cause she was the only parent I had.
Mm-hmm.
So I just never wanted to believe that she was all of these things that I thought she was, you know?
Yeah.
I kept on thinking like, I'm wrong, you know, you just can't accept it. And I mean, this started from like 6 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like her calling up a man and saying, come tie my child to the bed and beat her up. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't even, like, from 6 years old, I couldn't accept the fact that she's the one that called him over. Like, he's the bad guy.
Right.
You know what I mean? I could never blame her for anything because it's like, if I blamed her, then what did I have? I had literally nobody.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't let my brain
had.
go there. She's all I had. And it wasn't until that moment when I just suddenly could not deny anymore who she actually was. And
well, her beside this literal terrorist.
Yeah.
That was you end the chapter kind of juxtaposing them, and you're like, this man had mercy on me, and then my own mother was the one who did it.
Yeah. An actual terrorist.
Yeah.
That's the thing, though, that also took me a long time to come to grips with because he was very abusive.
Right.
And so I had a lot of, obviously, anger and hate towards him.
Right.
But
it didn't make him good. It just was a moment.
But in hindsight, I can see that, who knows, for Assam, it was circumstantial. You know what I mean? He turned into this terrorist not because he was born inherently as an evil person.
Right.
But because he truly believed that that was the path to heaven.
Right.
And that killing infidels was the best possible use of his life, and that he would reach these levels of heaven that no other person can reach unless they are a jihadi.
Right.
So it basically, the indoctrination took somebody who had the potential to be a perfectly decent human being, and it turned him into a monster.
Right.
And then also all of these edicts in Islam that give men power over women, it's not that hard of a leap. Like, you can see, like, if you are, you know, a 16-year-old boy or 17-year-old boy or something like that, and you're told, like, if your wife misbehaves, or if you fear, like, literally what the verse in the Quran says is, if you fear arrogance or disobedience from your wife, then beat her. So it's not even if she
does
is
the
arrogant
thing,
or if she's disobedient, which is bad enough. But it's like, if you even sense it from her, if you fear that she might, then you beat her to put her in place.
Like a preemptive strike or something.
Yeah. So he's always raised with this mentality that it's his job to control the woman that he's living with, like that it's his responsibility. And there's this thing of, in Islam, like, this is why honor violence is a thing and honor killings are a thing, is because men are raised to believe that it's their responsibility to keep the woman in line.
Right.
And so all of this insidious shit turns what could potentially be good human beings into evil monsters.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And if somebody is already inherently an evil monster, then all of these edicts basically give them carte blanche
to just go and
it's sanctioned by the religion.
Right.
So it's never a good thing. You know what I mean? So because people say like, oh, just, not all Muslim men beat their wives, some of them don't. It's like, yes, that is true. Of course, not all of them beat their wives, but those that do beat their wives have this, clause in the religion that sanctions it. And so then they can just continue to do so with impunity. And that's why you end up in like issues like in Morocco, where a daytime TV show was teaching women how to apply their makeup to cover the black eye that their husband gave them the night before. Like it just becomes sort of it's just part of natural life, and that's how these things happen.
You do give you don't say it's okay, but I do find you are good at giving explanations as to how could someone be like that. So you mention about, you talk a little bit about, I think, his background, or maybe that was with Sam Harris. You explained how he was bullied.
No, I said it in the book too.
You said it in the book too. Okay. And then there's explanations about, for women, why, like, it's like you take it out on the dog. You kick the dog when you're being kicked yourself, So I think you give a fair assessment. You're not excusing, but we need to explain to people why. It's like, this isn't just because you're not saying it's okay. You're not saying, like, you're not saying it's understandable, or it's sort of a fine line. And I do find that you were good at walking it.
You're absolutely right, because it's not about excusing the behavior, because it's not excusable. But what's important is that I want people to understand that when they see Muslims doing horrific things,
right,
like when they strap a suicide vest on their own child, or those women in Iraq, like through ISIS, that were like putting the bomb in their newborn baby, because then the American military aren't going to check the baby, right? They'll check the woman and stuff like that. People are like, how is somebody so devoid of humanity?
Right.
And so it's not explaining, of course, or excusing this woman murdering her child and herself, but it's just to sort of allow people to see that they're not born in like inherently evil people.
Mm-hmm.
They're indoctrinated into that.
Right.
And that's something that people are uncomfortable. It's a conversation people are uncomfortable having. But Sam Harris does a really good job of explaining this, because his family is Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And he's lost family in the Holocaust. So he does a really good job of explaining how you can see these Nazi soldiers are essentially like having a picnic on a grassy knoll as they are literally, burning people to death.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're just taking their break and having some sandwiches and coffee on the grass. Yeah. Like, you think, and then they go home and they're reading a bedtime story to their kid, or, sewing a costume for their neighbor, whatever it is. Yeah. Like they're human beings, but they're doing the most inhumane things at the same time. And I think that that's really hard. Like, people don't want to accept that. Right. People find it so much easier to accept black and white. Like you're either going to be like it's that whole, Madonna or thing.
Yeah.
You're either going to be, if you're a Nazi, then you were born a
Evil.
killer, a genocidal maniac, evil, you were just like that. It's like, well, no, because if you look at like Hitler Youth and all that, like these kids were not born evil. They were indoctrinated into this evil, and then they end up doing evil things, and sure, they end up becoming evil people. But we all, unfortunately, this is what people don't want to accept. I think the reason why they don't want to accept it is because they don't want to accept that they have the potential, or that had for just a stroke of luck, had they been born in a different country, under a different religion or whatever, then they would have also done these horrific things. They just they don't want to know that that's true. But it's unfortunately true.
Well, I've heard a quote about the line of good and evil runs down every human heart. I don't know who said it, probably Carl Jung, and I probably heard it from Jordan Peterson or something. Because he has that little thought experiment about, now, do you think you'd be the 10% that would refuse to be the Nazi prison guard, or in the 90% that probably would have accepted the post?
Yeah. I mean, and there's that Stanford prison experiment that happened in like the 60s or 70s. You've heard of that, right?
I have. The example I think of is that book, Ordinary Men. Have you heard of that? It's in were they in Poland? They were the police officers that the Nazis left in charge of this one town in Poland. And it starts, and they're not SS. They're not even really Nazis. They're just the police force that the Nazis were like, okay, you're basically law enforcement and mayor, and you have all control, and we're going by. And no one made them do anything. They chose, and they ended up, I think, murdering, execution style, a pregnant woman out in a field, like that. But they're ordinary men, and we don't even know where we will be. But I mean, but by the grace of God, or by a stroke of luck, or whatever you believe, but by wherever you end up, you don't know what you're capable of in the storm.
Yeah.
Like, we're on calm waters here, people.
Yeah. And we see that that theme being repeated, like in the show The Walking Dead and stuff like that. Like, we're always trying to explain to people, like, but it's so hard because now that I'm not indoctrinated,
right,
I can totally understand somebody trying to convince me of that and me being like, nope. I will never believe that to be true because I would never hurt another human being. I don't care what kind of coercion, it would never happen.
But you've been through it. You've been through
I've been there, and so I know.
But that's why you have to be so there's this, I'm gonna quote a Bible verse. But okay. Like we're wise as serpents, innocent as doves. You need to not be a monster yourself, but you must be knowing as you're going through life. Like, don't be ignorant.
Well, that's the key. You have to be aware of the fact that it's not even that I care that people are aware of the fact that they have it in them. That's not even my objective for repeating this point. My objective is for them to see that Muslim people are not inherently evil.
Okay.
My objective is for them to see that they're just human beings, just like you and me.
Right.
But they were born in these systems that is just it's mob mentality on steroids.
Right.
It's fear mongering on steroids. I mean, they're not just being told you will suffer on earth. They will suffer on earth if they don't do as they're told, but they're also being told you will suffer for eternity. Like, there's no way for me to describe to somebody how that will control your actions. I mean, the perfect example, there's two good examples, but one of them is Abraham himself, the man who started this whole trilogy. He was willing to sacrifice his own child for God.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't even look at that as like, wow, that's pretty messed up of Abraham to do that. We actually, Muslims look at that as that is how much faith he had. That is how good he was, that he was willing to kill his son.
Mm-hmm.
Now, today, in the modern context, if we were to see somebody like a Jehovah's Witness parent say, I'm not going to give a blood transfusion to my kid, knowing that their child could die from that, but still they're making that ultimate sacrifice and that ultimate decision because that is what their religion demands of them.
Right.
That person sees themselves as pious and good. They're not a murderous monster wanting to murder their child, just like Abraham wasn't a murderous monster wanting to murder his child.
Right.
But the belief, the virus that is in their head is causing them to do something that is so inhumane and so beyond what you or I or any normal person could understand.
Right.
So really that's my objective of belaboring this point is because there is this, you see Muslims doing like Truck of Peace or the nail bomb at the Ariana Grande concert and, just absolutely horrific things like ISIS, like, killing pregnant women or making women eat their own babies and all sorts of like,
oh my goodness,
just the most beyond heinous things.
Mm-hmm.
And you think to yourself, what kind of evil monsters are those people?
Right.
And it's the same thing when you look at Nazis and what they did. And you're like, what kind of evil monsters are those people? And it's just to say that those people were born with the potential of becoming normal, good human beings. But because of the circumstances, they ended up becoming evil monsters. And the only reason why that's an important point to make is because there is they can, very quickly, there's blanket statements that are like, if Muslims can do that, then we have to fear them because they're evil.
So that's like the one side. And then the other side of what you're sort of trying to reach, like, is this identity politic, the feminist group of women that you would think would love to partner with you to liberate these Muslim women from patriarchy. You'd think they would be loving, like, hey, come on, link arms with me, sister. Right?
Yeah.
So you have the one side of like, hey, let's not be xenophobic here. Like, they're people. So you have that one side. Yeah. And then, because I brought up the feminist community before, so the two sort of groups of women. So now to end with them, they're saying you're the xenophobe. Or you're the one who's not respecting the culture. We mentioned this at the beginning here, but and colonialism brought those silly thoughts of not wanting to wear a hijab. I saw them defend it with Roxane Gay and Christina Hoff Sommers. Did you see that?
Yeah, Roxanne has blocked me on Twitter. That because of my reaction.
When she said, well, I mean, it's like, well, Christina, I mean, you're trying to go in this one direction here, but colonialism. And like, that was it. Anyway, could you go into what you face again with, not against, but from the feminist community? Yeah. So it's again, just trying to express that just because they're on a different part of the planet or just because they have a different skin color, it doesn't mean that they are any different humans than we are. So this is really all just the same point, but just with two different examples. So the one example being like, had any one of you been born in, Afghanistan under the Taliban or whatever the case may be, you would have also done horrific things, right? And I'm also trying to explain that we are the same people, right? Humans are all the same. So if women on this side of the world and with white skin and blonde hair and blue eyes want their freedom,
women over there
want
with brown
freedom
skin
as
and
well.
brown eyes and brown hair also want their freedom. Like, we are not that different. We are not different. We are all human beings, and we're all the same. And to express the fact that you think that women over there are different than women over here, to me, is pure racism.
Right.
Like that, and it's coming from a group of people who like to pat themselves on the back for, being so worried about not being racist when they are actually the most racist. For you to excuse behaviors of patriarchy and misogyny and sexism and oppression of women for those women over there, the kind of actions that you would never accept for yourself or for your daughters or for anyone in a similar geographical location as you, that's the thing that disgusts me, and that I need them to see how incredibly racist they're being when they do that.
To think that women don't want to have their hair be touched by sunlight.
And their face. I mean, there was a quote that, if you heard me on Bridget's podcast, when I talked about that quote from the woman in Saudi Arabia who said, if I'm being honest with myself, and if my husband isn't listening, sometimes I miss the feeling of the night air on my cheeks.
Yeah.
Like, the anger that I get thinking of that quote, like, honestly, I could just tear her husband's eyes out. Like, I'm so angry that there is a human woman on this earth that had to make that statement, and to start the statement with, if I'm being honest with myself. Like, she can't even express it she with anger or with the fury that it deserves, but she's apologetic about it, like, if I'm being honest with myself, and if my husband isn't listening, something as simple as, she can't even just say, I miss the night air on my motherfucking face. Sorry, but it's so infuriating that they have to live like that. And that we over here are not only not supporting them,
we're celebrating hijab.
We work against them. We are working against those women. We pretend, we put on a little pink knit pussy hat, and we walk in the streets with our signs, and we pretend that we care about women, and we pretend that we care about feminism.
Right.
But what are those signs that they were holding at the Women's March? There was a woman in hijab on those posters. Like, you are literally supporting the oppression of these women as you're pretending to be a feminist.
And on the I know that you started the No Hijab Day as a response, is that correct, to the World Hijab Day?
Yeah, it was super petty.
Well, but it's effective, though. I mean, women
initially
need an outlet to be like, no.
Yeah. It's like, if you want to have a day where you're going to celebrate women, it's not even just celebrating women that wear hijab, but they put up booths all over universities and workplaces and government offices all over, like, almost 200 countries. And in those booths, they have hijabs, and they put them on non-Muslim women, and they encourage them to wear hijab for the day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard that women that refuse are told that they're Islamophobic, right? Like, there's coercion to force women to wear hijab. Right. So, like, that's not enough of that happening in the Muslim world, but let's bring that over to the West too, and try to shame these white Western women to wear this tool of misogyny.
Yeah.
And I saw this happening, and I literally, the day I heard about it, I got such a migraine, and I was so depressed. I couldn't even articulate thoughts, let alone words. And I like slept the day away. I was so disturbed by it. And then the next year, I decided that I was going to fight back, that I'm not going to just, you know, be upset about it. But then it also gave me some time to digest it and think about, you know, what I could do.
Right.
And of course, the natural reaction to encouraging women to put on their hijab, the opposite of that would be encouraging women to take off their hijab.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I could not do that.
Right.
Because being a woman who was threatened with death for removing my hijab, I understand the, you know, the risks that a woman would take that for removing a hijab. And I would never encourage a woman to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Some people had started No Hijab Day where that literally was the point.
Mm-hmm.
And they were encouraging Muslim women to remove their hijabs and post their photos on social media. And some women were covering their eyes or whatever, and they were doing that. I took that idea of No Hijab Day and I put it on February 1st, which was the day of hijab, of International Hijab Day, or World Hijab Day.
Yeah.
And I changed, so it wasn't about hijabis taking off their hijabs, but instead it was to support, to encourage, to champion, and to celebrate all of the Muslim women who do not want to wear hijab.
But who can't.
But who are, of course, you know, even somebody like Dina Tokyo, who is a woman in the UK, who is a hijab or a modesty model. She decided to take off her hijab. And the backlash that she received from the community was so fierce that she has a video online where she just, for 1 hour, she just scrolls through her phone and reads the hate. And it's all sorts of stuff like about how she should be raped and how her family should be murdered, and like the most horrific responses to a woman deciding that she doesn't want to wear a cloth on her head.
Well, just today on Twitter, we saw, you retweeted something that I was like, oh, I didn't know you retweeted it. And I was like, hey, look at this. We were just going to talk about this. And you're like, yeah, I kind of shared that. And everyone.
Yeah.
So it's a woman who has a hijab in one photo, showing her looking beautiful in the other photo, just free, no hijab on, says not a word about hijab in the description, just saying, oh, me, what a difference is it, 10 years? 10 years.
Beginning of the decade and end of the decade or something like that.
And it was just her own life journey. And then she got tons of criticism and she had to write an explanation tweet. And she's like, I didn't say anything about Islam. I didn't say anything about hijab. And you're like, yeah, girl, I've heard this story over and over. It's like the idea of removing it without even officially removing it is an assault against Islam. Like, that's what it looked like.
Exactly. That's exactly how they view it. And so that's why I wanted to create No Hijab Day, was to encourage women like this woman that you just out, who is having to deal with this backlash and is having to deal with all of these, you know, horrific responses to her making a personal decision about her own personal body, and to just say, we celebrate you, we support you, we're here for you. So women all over the world, but specifically women in Iran who can go to prison for not wearing a hijab, and women in Saudi Arabia also who are forced, more societal pressures. But there was a woman in Saudi Arabia that was imprisoned for taking a picture without a hijab on. And, you know, the society really pressures women to not just wear hijab there, but to wear niqab. And so this No Hijab Day is a day to encourage women all over the world, because there is pressure everywhere, but just to different extents. People say, oh, women in Canada are free, women in the UK are free, women in the US are free. No, they're not. They still have familial pressures. They still have societal pressures, community pressures. The only difference is they're not going to literally get imprisoned for it. But all those other pressures are still there. And those women can still be, you know, victims of honor violence and even honor killings.
Well, okay, so we don't, I don't know how much time we have left here. It's been a bit of time. But I did want to talk about, I want to end on there were a number of women in your life who, I don't know how to pronounce the word, kufar, how is it? who are unclean.
Yeah.
Is it unclean
That means
or other?
It just means like non-believers.
Non-believers. Okay.
But it's like a bad word.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there were a number of women in your life who were kind of instrumental in putting cracks in the cement. And because I kind of want to go over like, well, what can we do? Us Western women who want to partner with women who are on the other side of the world. And yes, you can retweet the No Hijab Day stuff and stuff online. Yes. But I'd like to hear personally, if you know someone personally, like your story again can speak louder than, oh, here's some things you can do. So I'd like to hear the impact of some women as to how they helped you see the light.
Yeah. So for me, the biggest person to help me see the light was Tiffany.
Yeah.
So she is, I've dedicated the book to her. She was everything to me. She's the person that cracked that cement for me. And it was done in a very, we're best friends. So, it came from a place of just love and her wanting me to be happy and not feel so scared all the time and be so restricted all the time. And so that was my personal experience. But for the general public, I would say that the way you can support these women is, like you said, through supporting their campaigns. So go to hashtag White Wednesdays, go to hashtag My Stealthy Freedom, go to hashtag No Hijab Day, go to hashtag Free From Hijab, go to hashtag Hijab is Rape Culture. And when you see women that are posting these pictures and posting these videos, retweet them, support them. Again, I mentioned in my book, like, you don't think that just a retweet is going to make much of a difference, but it really, the one example that I give in my book is this woman in Montreal named Zahra. She's Lebanese Canadian, who was living in a abusive relationship, wearing hijab. She saw all this No Hijab Day stuff going on, and she said, you know what? She sent me a message, and she said, that's the day I'm going to take my hijab off. Is No Hijab Day. I'm going to take my hijab off, and I'm going to post a video. That's going to be the first time I do it. And I was like, yes, I can't wait. And she took it off in the video, and she made a statement in Arabic and English and French. And at the end of the video, she takes off her hijab, and then she gets like this embarrassed smile because it's like her first time being in public, sort of public. She doesn't realize how it's just her and her phone. But she's like, oh my God, I just showed my hair to the world. And of course, this thing gets retweeted like 10,000 times. Right. And she got so encouraged by that her next step after that was to leave her abusive relationship and eventually to leave Islam. So through removing this shackle, by removing this physical thing, she was able to free her mind after that, free herself from an abusive relationship. It's really literally the shackles. Like, just take that off. That's the physical thing that is holding, like it's gripping your head. It is gripping your mind. Once you take that very first step, and then you're kind of find yourself in an open field where you can go in any direction you choose. But as long as you're constricted by this thing, then you feel like that's where you're going to be stuck. So yes, please support all of these women online. And when you see the lunacy, like when you see a burkini on the cover of Sports Illustrated, speak out about it. Don't be afraid to say, hey, why don't we have, a woman in Mormon underwear on the cover of Sports Illustrated? Don't be afraid to speak out against the fact that we are celebrating religious misogyny and religious fundamentalism on the cover of these magazines. Don't be afraid to speak out against Nike putting their swoosh on this tool of misogyny that gets women killed across the world. And having those conversations is really, really important because everybody's thinking it. but it normalizes that conversation.
Right.
Because right now, as long as you're quiet, then you are no different than all these people living in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia that are afraid that they're going to be imprisoned for speaking their minds. You might as well not even have free speech in your countries if you are going to censor yourself.
The fear of being called, not being racist, but being called racist is so deep, because it's like a mark of shame that we can't. Once you're called racist, you're kind of publicly, I suppose. It's almost.
So like, Katie Herzog.
Yeah.
Katie Herzog writes for The Stranger.
Yeah.
And
second
she was
most
quoting
hated
somebody else.
Person who writes for The Stranger, is it?
Yeah. So she wrote a quote the other day on her Twitter feed where she said, "Like anal, it only hurts the first time."
Oh gosh.
I'm saying this to the Christian girl.
Oh no.
But the point being, just get over it. Sure, racist, Nazi, KKK. I mean, of course, that kind of stuff used to upset me in the beginning.
Yeah.
But if being called racist and Nazi and whatever, all that bullshit that they throw at me, yes, it's hurtful. Yes, it's upsetting. But if that's all they have, but through me speaking out, you know what I mean? It's really just the rape gangs again.
Right.
If you shutting your mouth means that you're going to allow these girls to continue to get raped, well, that's your decision.
Right.
If you're like, I would rather not have people call me bad names than protect
Stand up
these
for
girls.
those girls. Yeah.
That's your business. That's a choice you're going to have to make. Yeah. What's more important to you?
Right.
Avoiding people calling you bad names, or avoiding empowering people that are hurting women?
Oh man, you are so good at putting things in perspective. Words don't break people. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, they do.
And in fact,
they break you in. Like, I mean, it's here versus like your life.
Yes.
Like, it hurts me psychologically. Let's not sugarcoat it. Twitter mobs can be very scary, but you're not going to die. Literally. You're
not going to die. And through speaking out, you could be preventing helping someone else. I can't even tell you how many of those people that I interact with online are just on the cusp of suicide. Like, that's just where they live. They live on that precipice. And seeing, even when it's anonymous people, seeing anonymous people speak up for them, people that they've never met, people that they will never meet, it really is so healing. It really helps them to feel less alone, less scared, less, just tortured in their own minds.
Right. Okay, I think that's a good note to end on.
And also you can support Free Hearts, Free Minds if you so choose. Yeah. That's also that's a tangible way of supporting free thinkers in the Muslim world as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's something, and I mean, anyone support, but like, I love women supporting women. It's just like a beautiful thing. I mean, again, if you're a man, please support in any way. But if you're a woman especially, please, extra support is beautiful. So